Hi, everyone. My name is Whitney Zeigler. I'm the founder of Big Rocks Organizing. Founded the company in 2015, and we're based out of Portland, Oregon. We are a women-owned LGBTQIA+ organization, and we are professional organizers and move managers. We help our clients through life transitions. Thank you for being here today for our free monthly event. We have a series each month, and it's called Ask the Organizer, and we have a special guest and a different topic each month. This month, I'm really excited to collaborate with Angie Freyer. She is our colleague from NAPO, Oregon, and NAPO stands for the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals. And so we've been colleagues for a while now, and really proud to collaborate with her today on organizing through grief. So I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Angie, and then I'll turn things over to her. Angie started her professional organizing business, Function and Flow, in 2018, after almost a decade working as an occupational therapist. As a home health therapist, Angie loved working with clients in their homes, but felt that something was missing. With the support of friends and family, Angie discovered her skill for organizing and holding space for people as they sorted their belongings. Angie's own experience with grief guided her as she started working more closely with clients experiencing significant loss. Today, Angie focuses on the intersection of grief and our surroundings. She helps clients uncover the transformative and healing power of their home environments. Angie's a native Oregonian and loves going on road trips in her camper van, socializing with friends, and cuddling with her feline companion, Clementine. Please welcome Angie Freyer.
Thank you so much, Whitney. It's really good to see everyone here today. It's nice to see familiar faces and then some new faces as well. So I'm really looking forward to today's presentation. And I hope that you can walk away with from this presentation with a better knowledge about grief and its impact on our physical spaces. So you can go ahead and start the slides, Jean. Wonderful. Okay. So really one of the main reasons why I think this topic is so pertinent is because at some point in our lives, we are all going to grieve the loss of something or someone. So this could be the loss of a job, divorce, changes in health, or the loss of a loved one. So grief really is a shared human experience, and much of our grief takes place within the walls of our home. So working in this area for the last few years, I've discovered that this topic is not actually discussed very much in our communities, even in the organizing community. So today I really wanted to shed some light and give a better understanding about how grief manifests in our surroundings and discuss some strategies for reclaiming your personal space after loss. Okay, Jean, you can, next slide. So before I share my own journey with grief, I wanted to start out by saying that grief is really unique to each individual. So those of you who have experienced grief probably know this very well. Not only is the thing that we are grieving unique, but each of our personal backgrounds is unique, and the emotions that we go through are all unique to each person. So no two persons' grieving journey is going to look the same. During this discussion, I really want you, if you are someone who has lost a significant other or is going through grief, I want you to really own your own journey and not let other people's expectations dictate how you process. So especially some things that I might say today might not resonate with you, and that's okay. Just take what feels right and leave the rest. And I'm hoping that at the end, we'll have some time for discussion, and I would love to hear people's stories and questions. So I'm hoping to do questions and discussions at the end, but if there's a burning question, feel free to raise your hand and Whitney can kind of guide that. So the challenging thing about grief is that it never goes away. It's a journey and there's no final destination. So finding time and space to process at a pace that is right for you can be very crucial to your healing. Okay, Jean, next slide. Before I get into the concept of grief organizing, I wanted to share a little bit about my own journey with grief and my background. So my first real experience with grief started in 1998. I was a senior in high school, and my mom had gone in for a heart surgery. And it was after that surgery that we discovered that she had a pretty rare disease called Cushing's. And it's a disease that impacts your hormones and impacted her ability to heal. So after that surgery, she was actually in the hospital for 3 months during my senior year. So she wasn't able to help me look at colleges, couldn't do all the things that I was looking forward to sharing with her during my senior year. She did heal from that surgery, but that was kind of the beginning of the deterioration of her health. So, over the next 8 years, our family kind of watched as my mom got sicker and sicker. She ended up having a series of mini strokes and was eventually diagnosed with a vascular dementia. And toward the end of her life, she barely knew who we were and she wasn't able to talk. And then we finally were told by a speech therapist that she could no longer swallow or keep food down. So our family had to make a really difficult decision of what to do. And we knew that my mom did not want any extraneous measures. So we decided that we were going to let her life end naturally. So I was 25 years old when she died. And at the time of her death, I never imagined that I would become an occupational therapist. And then over a decade later, a professional organizer with a focus on grief and its impact on our personal spaces. All I can remember at that time was just being consumed by so many emotions. And also this feeling that I needed to move on because everything around me felt like it was moving at such a fast pace. And I just felt stuck in one place. So I was going to share a little short story with you guys. And I'm sure, again, those of you that have experienced grief have probably experienced something similar to this. A few months after my mom passed away, I went to the grocery store because, we have to do daily tasks and eat. And so I went to the grocery store and I remember being in line with all my groceries and just seeing a couple in front of me and they were laughing and happy. And I all of a sudden got so angry and became really overcome with sadness and started bawling in the grocery store and had to leave my cart with my groceries and just went home and ended up bawling. And it was actually in my home that I realized how comforting my home environment was because I could be somewhere where I felt safe to express my emotions and didn't have to be around other people. So, I think one of the reasons that I really want to focus on physical environments during grief is because we cannot control other people. We can't control how other people respond to us and our grief. We may have people that are very well intentioned and but they don't always know the right things to say, and that's okay. But we need to find ways and areas that are within our control where we can give ourselves the time and space that we need to process our grief. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to explore today. Okay, Jean, next slide. So, how grief impacts our physical spaces. And again, this is kind of an overview. So, there's a lot more ways, but I kind of wanted to focus on some of the things that I've seen in the work that I've done. So, grief permeates all areas of our life. So, it's not surprising that our physical environments often become neglected. Stacks of mail pile up, and dirty dishes take a backseat while we are consumed with our loss. And sometimes this onslaught of emotions can make it really hard to focus. Grief kind of hijacks our concentration and our ability to make decisions. This can become even more challenging when we need to make decisions about what to do with our loved ones' belongings, or even just how to keep up with daily household tasks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about going through loved ones' belongings in a few more slides. But right now I want to kind of focus on our physical environments. And the other way that grief can really impact our physical spaces is the change in daily routine. So, as most of you know, routines really help anchor our days and they give us structure when we're unsure of what to do. And when we've experienced a loss, routine is often pushed aside and can cause uncertainty and chaos in our home environment. So, our sleeping routines can change, our eating habits may change, and these can all impact how we're able to process and our ability to do daily chores and keep our homes feeling manageable. Okay, Jean, next slide. So, when we're experiencing grief, it can be really overwhelming just to know where to start. It's really important to remember that grief is not linear, and neither is the way that you approach your home environment after a significant loss. So I often tell my clients and also remind myself that it does not matter where you start. What matters is that you start somewhere. So, here are a few considerations when addressing your physical spaces during grief and kind of how to get started. So, really, this kind of slide is more about household tasks, but like I said, I'm going to address other areas of emotion of grief, such as the emotional aspect, in the next few slides. First off, it's really important to set realistic goals. So, you do not need to get everything done all at once. Breaking it into really small and manageable steps can be helpful. If cleaning an entire room or going through an entire room feels like too much, break it down into the most important things that you need to do to feel comfortable in your space. So that might be honestly just getting the garbage off the floor, moving the dishes into the sink so you have a clear countertop, so you're not looking at so much visual overwhelm, so that your environment just feels a little bit calmer. Choose simple tasks that allow you just a little bit more breathing room in your physical space. The other one is establishing simple routines. So, as I mentioned earlier, routines can really have a big impact in your life and kind of help ground you and structure your day. And when you're grieving, it's really important to try to establish new routines because, like I said before, your routines can just get thrown into disarray. So, this might include a daily routine of sitting quietly each morning, giving yourself time to journal. If that feels good to you, it might even be some really basic tasks and making routines around showering, making routines around eating, because oftentimes when we're grieving, those things can kind of go by the wayside. So, trying to do at least one thing at a time and then give yourself a small break before tackling another task. Again, really trying to think about just doing one small thing that makes you feel good, and then you can step away from it and come back later if you need to. Just remember, even one small task can help you move forward. So, the next one is being compassionate with yourself. And this is really important. And this has taken me years to discover. And I talk a lot with clients about this. So, it's really important to let yourself be okay with not getting things done immediately. This was really critical in my grief process. As a fairly organized person by nature, I felt like it was some moral failing if I didn't get the dishes done or if I didn't take the garbage out in a timely manner. Yet sometimes I couldn't even get off the couch. So I think once I gave myself permission to let go of these tasks, even if just momentarily, I was able to focus more on my emotions and not have so much shame and judgment around it. And I think, again, it's just so important to be compassionate with ourselves, like you would a friend, because again, it's no moral failing if you just feel like you can't handle these things. Just try to do one small thing and be patient with yourself. Okay, Jean, next slide. Okay, so this slide is a little bit more about acknowledging our emotions and the emotional attachment that we may have to things as we're processing. And this really um, is more about if you've lost someone significant, but again, this could be relevant if you've gone through a divorce, any changes that you're experiencing in your life that are causing you grief. So you may have inherited some items from your loved one that you're just not ready to part with. Um, and there is no timeline for going through these items. Like I said earlier, sometimes we may have this feeling of like, I just want to get this done, but there's no ending. So there's really no getting it done. It's what feels good to you. So if you're not ready to say goodbye to items right away, or if you're not even ready to go through them, I really recommend that you allow yourself some time to process. Create some decision boxes to go through, and you can, if you have the space, put them in your garage so you can go through them later. I really think it's important, especially with grief, that you give yourself this time to process. And this can give you some freedom to navigate at your own pace without having all of your loved ones' belongings kind of staring you in the face, begging you to make a decision, because that can feel really overwhelming as well. The next one is really allowing yourself time to process. And like I talked about, making those decision boxes. Um, so, one thing as organizers, and I think that there are a few organizers on this call, we often tell clients, like, hey, if you're not making a decision now, you're just going to have to make it later. But I really want to point out that grief organizing is a lot different than regular organizing, because there are so many emotions that go along with it. So it's okay to delay some of these decisions if you do not feel ready. And so again, there should be no shame or judgment around this. I really encourage that compassion piece to come in and say, I'm just not ready to handle these things right now. Um, Creating a memory space. This is also going to really kind of tap into the emotional piece. So maybe designating a specific area in your home where you can honor and remember your loved one, whatever this means to you, having a picture up, having some of their items. This could even be a shelf with photos, keepsakes, even keeping a journal can really help create those memories alive, keep those memories alive. So just having that dedicated space can really provide some comfort for you. And then preserving meaningful items. If there are items that hold really deep meaning to you that you want to keep, find ways to preserve them or incorporate them into your daily life. So this could be displaying them or even finding new uses for items. I know for me, my mom had a ton of Hummels. I don't know if you guys know what Hummels are, those German little figurines, and she probably had about 50 of them. And it was really hard. I did not want to keep all of them, but I decided to keep about 10, and they're kind of dispersed throughout my house. And I love looking at them, and they make me feel so happy. So I was able to take that large amount and consolidate it down into an amount that felt good to see and really cherish these memories of my mom. Okay, Jean, next slide. Okay, so we touched on this a little bit going through a loved one's belongings. So this is kind of similar to what I discussed earlier about acknowledging emotions, but there are a few other considerations that I wanted to mention here. So, another added element that affects our physical environments is that after a loved one has passed, family and friends are often the ones who have to go through their loved one's personal belongings. And the person grieving is often responsible for cleaning out their loved one's space. So this process can really vary depending on whether you live in your house, like you've lived in your house with your loved one, or if you're having to travel across the country to go through your loved one's house to clean things out. But inevitably, you are going to acquire more items that probably need to find a space within your home. So, acknowledging that additional items can really add more stress to your living space, even if they're items that hold meaning and that you love seeing, they still can add stress. And sometimes our physical environments can already feel overwhelmed with our own items. And so, bringing in more things, you need to find a way to make room for these items. So, similar to kind of creating decision boxes, give yourself permission to possibly rent a storage unit if you need. Again, no shame and judgment around this. If you need a storage unit for a little bit of time to process, that is okay, because having so many of these things in your personal space can feel very overwhelming. So giving yourself a little bit of room can be really helpful. So another factor to think about is if you're sharing the space with your loved one and you're continue to live in that house after they've passed away. It can be a lot harder to go through items when you're still living in that space because their personal belongings are embedded all over the house. And if you're used to seeing something in a certain place, it can be really hard to move it or get rid of it because you almost feel like you're not honoring that person. But I would say acknowledging that this is your home and you can make it feel however you would like. So if you need to move something, giving yourself permission to do that. And again, you don't have to get rid of it right away. Maybe just moving it somewhere so you don't have to have it in your personal space staring at you all the time. Um, the other thing is hiring somebody to help. And again, lots of resources on this call, but trained professional organizers who really understand grief can be a really good resource to help you go through a loved one's belongings and navigate this process. Sometimes this can be really hard to do with family members because everyone is experiencing their own emotions. So it can be really helpful to hire someone who isn't related and doesn't have those same personal attachments. Okay, Jean, next slide. Okay, so another area, again, and this relates to our physical environment because a lot of these things happen within our personal spaces, but really prioritizing yourself. And I know self-care, sometimes that word gets overused, but really thinking about just giving yourself a quiet space in your home, whether that means sitting down for a cup of tea or letting yourself have a nap in the middle of the day. Those can all be forms of self-care. So regular self-care tasks can really help comfort you when you're dealing with so many emotions. So I might even say schedule self-care tasks. Give yourself time, and I really would encourage these to be, and if again, if watching TV feels comforting to you, but I would really encourage them to be things that make you feel that where you're quiet and you can maybe journal if that feels good, reading, but things where you're not having a lot of input into your environment. Seeking support. Really, a big thing is you don't have to be a hero in your grief. I think so many times it's like, oh, I've got this. Or when people ask you how you are, I'm fine, everything's fine. Everything does not have to be fine when you are grieving. So, really reaching out to family and friends, they do want to help you. And even though, as I said earlier, sometimes they may not know the right things to say, but if you ask for help, they will be there. And I think sometimes it's important to remember we kind of have to ask because people don't know always how to support us. So after my mom died, some of my actually most cherished memories were when friends came over to help me vacuum or do my dishes. And these were the friends that just showed up and they didn't even ask. But sometimes we do need to ask, and that's okay. But sometimes having people that can help you do these things can be a gift because it's not only letting them be a part of your grief, but it also is taking some of those mundane chores and tasks off of your plate. So it can really be transformative in your healing to allow people in and share those hard times with them. Outsourcing tasks when you can. This is also a way of prioritizing yourself. If you have the ability, pay someone to clean your house, have someone come over and help you go through mail. If you just need help with things, it's okay to outsource. And it doesn't have to be forever, but just giving, again, yourself that time that you need to process and not having to worry about all those household chores. So, again, hiring somebody is a great way to help do that. Um, so reflect and remember, and talked about this a little bit earlier in making memory spaces, but allow for moments of reflection. I think sometimes we get really busy and our society after a month or two, it's like, oh, we need to hurry up and move forward. And it's like there's no timeline to this. Really giving yourself time to reflect, giving yourself time to process, and acknowledging your emotions, that's a really important part of the healing process as well. And again, our physical environments can support in that. Okay, Jean, next slide. So, the healing power of space. So, as you can probably tell by now, I'm a really big proponent in our spaces helping us heal. Giving yourself a really quiet and simple place in your home can help in this. And again, sometimes our houses can feel overwhelming. This might even be just a little corner with your favorite blanket and some soft lighting, just somewhere that you can go and be away from people. If you have kids in your home, maybe just somewhere that you can carve out for yourself. I've actually worked with a few clients in helping them make these spaces. And one client really had nowhere in her house. It felt so overwhelming to her. And we talked about using her closet as a space. And so we actually cleared items out of her closet, put them in another area, and she had her closet as a little space where she could write and journal. And she said that it was the most powerful for her because she could just go somewhere and close the door and not have all of those distractions in her home that are in her home environment. So, also taking some time in this space to kind of remove your excess clutter and visual distractions so that you, again, don't see all those things staring you in the face and that you have a little bit of time to yourself. I would also recommend limiting technology in the space. Really see it as kind of a detox area where you can sit with simplicity and sit with all of your emotions. Okay, Jean, next slide. So, kind of one of my final thoughts is that grief has no timeline. And I talked about this a little earlier. There is no end date to grief. It evolves over time, but it never fully goes away. And I heard a really great quote once, and it's that grief is a silent sidekick that is always there. And for those of you who have experienced significant grief, you probably know this more than anyone else. There's always this weight. Even for me, 18 years later, I can still feel it. And it's not as, it doesn't knock me over the way that it used to in the beginning, but it's still there, just sitting with me quietly now. So I think it's really important to acknowledge, even in our friends who are grieving, continue to check in on them, go over to their houses, and continue to ask them about their grief. That's a really important part of processing. So the other thing is, there is no moving on, only moving forward. Hopefully, people who have grieved have realized this, because sometimes I think it was common to say, "Oh, when are you moving on? It's time to kind of move on." There is absolutely no moving on. As I was saying, 18 years later, I can still feel the grief of my mom's passing. But I have definitely moved forward, and my life is completely different than it would have been if she was in it. And there are also things that I never probably would have done if she was still alive. So it's just a different version of my life that I never would have expected. Um, Also, grief is not an either or emotion. And I think I kind of touched on this a little bit, even when my story about being in the grocery store. These emotions can hit you all at once. And sometimes you can feel happy and be okay. And then something else can hit you. And all of a sudden, you feel like you need to curl up in a ball and cry your eyes out. But also, while you're feeling joy, you can still be experiencing grief. So you don't feel grief and nothing else. You can still feel joy and happiness and anger and grief all in one. Um, you can be still grieving for your loved one and still experiencing joy. And again, I think that's a hard one for some people, because it feels like we're moving on and we're not acknowledging our loved ones or honoring our loved one. And that's not the case. You can still honor your loved one and still feel happy. So, as I kind of wrap up and conclude today, I really think it's important. What I really want a take home message is that grieving is really unique to each individual. And the ability to care for our personal environments is also unique to each of us. And so grieving is not a comfortable process, as a lot of us know. It's messy, and it's often sometimes that something that we want to push away and we want to ignore. But hopefully, by addressing our physical spaces and creating comforting environments, we can really empower ourselves to navigate these complexities of grief and create a peaceful place for emotional healing. Okay, next slide, Jean. So here are a few of my resources. Again, happy to, I can chat with Whitney and I can post these if needed. But yeah, I just want to thank everyone so much for coming. It's really nice to see everyone here. And again, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know a lot of you on this call have experienced grief. And again, I think it's just really helpful to open up these conversations and be able to discuss this in our communities. So thank you so much. Next slide, Jean. I've got maybe that's my thank you slide. Yeah. So now I want to open it up for questions and discussion. And really, I would love if you have a story related to your physical space, something maybe that's helped you in your grieving process. I would love to share that. I would love for you to share that. So if anyone wants to, you can either type it in the chat section or raise your hand. I think Whitney is going to kind of navigate the fielding the questions. And
Yes, I'll help look for
I appreciate that. Thank you, Whitney.
Leslie Norris.
Hi, Angie.
Hi, Leslie. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for stepping us through that. That was incredibly helpful and such good reminders, especially as someone who is grieving and has gone through grief. You hit a lot of good points that are very easily forgotten. Question for you, when you're thinking through creating a space in your home to remember a loved one, how would you go about, or what suggestions would you give someone to make it unique and special, but also not be a space that is maybe tacky or overdone, or some big kind of shrine the second like someone comes into your home? I think I sometimes myself have things from my father who passed similarly to you of how you have them kind of peppered throughout your home, but I find myself kind of hiding them behind things and then going through this weird emotional thing of, well, I want to present it in a way that feels like I'm honoring him, but also doesn't put people off if they come over and visit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And something that I, again, have had to sit with over the years is owning what feels good to me. And I think that that is true for everyone's grief journey, owning what feels good to you. And if it feels good to have a shrine of your dad in your home, that is okay. There is nothing wrong with that. But again, if you're a little bit self-conscious about it, which is natural, maybe you could have it in a place that you could move something in front of it when people come over, or something that can be easily transported and you can bring it out. So even if it's something that you could kind of pull out and you can sit and meditate near in the mornings, and then you could kind of move it if that feels good to you. And also, again, I think having things peppered throughout your house is a nice way when people do come over to ask you questions. Oh, what is that? What does that piece mean? What is that picture? Where's that trip from? And it opens up conversations about our loved ones that sometimes are often forgotten or people just don't ask. So I think it really is important to have things that feel good to you and that you can share with people when they do come to visit. Did that answer your question, Leslie?
You did. That makes sense. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mary Jo? I think that's the only one I see. Is that right, Whitney? I can't see everyone.
Can you hear me
Mary Jo,
okay, Angie?
and then Andrea.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm wondering, what do you do in a situation where you have a client where maybe they had their big grief event that happened really recently, like maybe even a week ago, and they reach out to you and they're like, that's it, I want to organize, I want to get rid of all the things. Do you ever find yourself telling them, like, maybe you should wait, we don't want to make hasty decisions we regret later? Or do you kind of go at the client's pace and assume that if they're ready to get rid of all this stuff, you're happy to facilitate?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because there is a fine balance there. So I have a few clients that I've worked with that have had pretty significant loss. One, it was a few months after her husband passed away, and I think she kind of was sort of ready to get rid of things. But we talked a lot, and I think a lot of this is about building relationships with your clients. And that's hard when they say, "Oh, I just want you to come and let's get rid of everything." But I tell clients that a big part of this is the relationship. I mean, that's the kind of organizer that I am, and again, not all organizers like to do this kind of work, and that's okay. But I think finding an organizer that does do this type of work, because they can tell the client, hey, in my experience, I have seen that it's okay to take things a little bit slower and not rush the process, because I think, again, in our society, we tend to rush things and say, well, I'm just going to do this so then I can feel better. And as we all know, just by getting rid of things, that is not going to make you feel better. And so I think it goes back to really listening to the client and honoring, okay, I hear you that you really want to get rid of some of these things, but is there an in between where we can maybe store some things where it feels good for now and then maybe come back to them? And so that's actually what I did with that client. She had a room that she said, okay, I'm just going to dedicate this room and we can put all of my husband's things in this room and I'm just not going to open it up. And she was okay with that. And so we labeled things. And then in our work together over the course of a few years, we've gone through and opened those boxes and she's been more ready. But I think what it was in the beginning is that it wasn't that she wanted to get rid of everything. She just wasn't ready to face all of it. But she felt like, I'm just ready to get rid of this because it felt so overwhelming. And so now, as time has gone by, she's actually able to share stories about him and able to talk more in a way that I don't think she would have been able to initially after he had passed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Andrea?
First of all, Angie, I just want to thank you. That was so insightful.
Oh, thank you, Andrea.
It was great. It's funny, my mom died when I was 26, so I understand a lot of what you went through. I found that I couldn't display anything of hers for years and years. And same when my dad passed, it just made me too sad until, it was probably at least a decade, which, I mean, grief is so weird. It is so individual.
Yeah, that's so true. Are you able, do you feel like now you're able to display more things and
Yeah, unfortunately, my dad got rid of most of my mom's stuff. That was his way of dealing with it. So I don't really have anything
Mm.
from her, but yeah, but it took a good 10 years. I mean, it's been 40 years, but it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Andrea, that is an interesting point that I didn't talk about. And if there are other people who are very, very close to you as well, and they are kind of the keepers of the things, and you may want some of the things, that is another thing that to do, to have to navigate with family members. Hey, who gets what? How does
Yeah.
this work?
It was
And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I kind of remember that, and I'm actually going through this currently almost with my brother, thinking about these things, and they're coming out more because we kind of did put them in storage, and then we've
yeah.
been looking at things more. So
Yeah, we didn't think to because none of the kids lived at home
mm,
time and we were all just, in just the worst possible place and we weren't even thinking about, well, what is dad doing with all the stuff? Turns out
yeah.
he's throwing it all away. So,
Oh, well, hopefully we're able to maybe find a few things or
yeah, we have a few things, but
yeah,
that's how he dealt with it. I just need to put it somewhere I can't be in this, so
yeah. Well,
yeah.
again, I think opening up these conversations is helpful too, so that we can kind of communicate, hey, I might not want this thing right now, but can you hold on to this? Or
Yeah, I think
yeah, can I hold on to this item if you don't want it in your house?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, being upfront about things and talking about things.
Yeah. And again, we don't always know in the moment, like you said, you just don't know. And then, 10, 15 years later, it's like, oh, what happened to that thing?
Yeah.
Any other questions, or if anyone wants to share any stories? I'm really grateful that everyone came and is very open. It's really nice to see everyone here. So thank you.
Can I just squeak up?
Oh yeah, hi Sharon.
Hi. So Angie, this is maybe a little bit to the side of your topic, but grief can come in other ways than actually losing your loved one and they leave this world. And the one thing I'm thinking of is the parent, particularly a mother, who might feel grief when her children either go off to school or leave the house for their adult life. And when I was working and my children started going off to college, my colleagues would come to me and say, oh my God, aren't you just so upset that your daughter is going to school in another state? And I looked at them like, are you nuts? The three of us, my son, my daughter, and I, worked like crazy for 18 years to get them to the colleges that they wanted, taking the classes they needed. They worked, they earned scholarships, the whole deal. And every time we got any little extra money, it went in the college fund. Of course, you all know the colleges kept ahead of us in cost. But no, I was happy for them. But a lot of women that were in the same category, they were in a grieving mode.
Mm,
Their child was moved out. They were in a different role now. They were not mom at home making most of the decisions or anything. Their routine was gone because they didn't even have to cook dinner if they didn't want to.
yeah.
So I'm wondering what you found out or what you might know about uh, what do we call the mother that feels like she's lost her role. That
Yeah.
wasn't me. I was happy for him. I had one in college, one coming right up behind the other one, and we were grateful for what we had achieved.
Yeah, yeah. And again, this goes back to everyone experiences things differently. And you were happy for your children, and some people might experience that differently. And they might still be happy, but also experience some sadness
That's
around that.
right. A little bit of
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. And I think what kind of struck me, and this is kind of thinking about being an occupational therapist, we think a lot about identity and our identity roles. And so for so long, identifying as a parent and a mother, and that was, a big role and a big identity. And so that that identity shifts very quickly when children leave the home. And so thinking about what can you do to make not even necessarily a new identity, but incorporate your role of a mother, but also now you're a mother that children aren't living in the home anymore. So what are some things, revisiting some things that you once liked doing, or revisiting things that bring you joy, and how can your home environment support you in that? So, maybe taking up a new craft that feels good in your home, or things that you haven't been able to do because you've had kids in the home for 18 years. So looking at it as, yes, it's hard, and it is a grief, but also how can you kind of embrace this new chapter, and what other things can you invite in, um, and yeah, see kind of create a little bit more of a new identity. Did that kind of answer that, Sharon, or any?
Thank you, Angie, for that. That reminds me of our colleague, Sherry Curley. She once said to change the language. So instead of saying, I have an empty nest, I'm a free bird. And by changing
Yeah,
our language, it can help change our mindset.
yeah, yeah. And again, with that, acknowledging all aspects of the emotion, that it's okay to be sad, and also what can you do to see, is there anything else I can do now that maybe I hadn't thought of?
Absolutely. We have a question in the chat, and then I think I
Yeah.
saw Karen's hand go up.
Oh, sure.
Jeanette writes, can you talk about healthy ways to let go of items, especially when one person in the household wants to cling to everything?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that question. Who was that from, Winnie? I didn't see the chat.
Jeanette?
Okay, thank you, Jeanette. So I think and that's also something I didn't really address much in this talk about, if someone loses a loved one and they have a partner and more people are living in the house and one person wants to hold on to things, or vice versa, one person wants to get rid of everything. Um, I think the healthy ways, again, so much of this, and again, this is kind of a general answer, it's really going to depend on your circumstances, but really communication is going to be really important. So communicating and saying, hey, these are the reasons why I want to hold on to this, and I'm just maybe not ready to let go. And is there a way, can you come to a common place with your partner or your roommates, whoever it is that's living in the home together, of finding a balance? Because again, in grief, a tendency can be to hold on to things, because it feels like if you let go of an object, you're letting go of your loved one. And so working through that process slowly. But yeah, can you find some common ground, or hey, here's a space that you can have and you can keep all the things you want, but can we maybe keep the common areas a little, with a little less stuff? So finding a balance and a common ground there. Does that answer your question, Jeanette? You can thumbs
Yeah,
up.
it does.
Okay.
What it is, it's a child, it's a teenager who wants to hold really tightly, and she's stashing and hoarding stuff.
Oh,
She doesn't want to let go. So
interesting. And I do feel like, again, this might be a totally different topic too, but sometimes with kids and, younger adults, it's good to kind of create these habits and talk to people about letting go of things, and that we can't hold on to everything, or else our homes just they don't have unlimited capacity for things. So talking about what are the things that you really want to keep, and what really does bring you joy, and what are some things that you can let go of. And I think in this case, maybe Jeanette, starting small, like really saying, well, could we look through a few of these things, and out of these 10 things, is there one thing that we can let go of, and see how that feels, and then kind of ease your way in.
Does anyone else have a question or comment for Angie?
Hi, Angie, this is Jane.
Oh, hi, Jane.
Mangold. Hi, I loved your presentation. I love this marrying of organization and grief. And I'm just getting started in the organizing field. And my first client, I just finished up with her today, has clothing beyond belief. And I've realized that this is a big part of her identity, is her wardrobe. It's pretty spectacular too, as I've handled a lot of the clothing. And I don't really have a question. It was really more an observation I had with her. Is she shared with me she's got clothing that she can't wear anymore. And she's in her early 60s, and, and she's having a hard time letting go. And she's made comments like, and this is really, I think, a form of grieving, where she's saying, I wouldn't wear that mini skirt today, but I wore it when I was 50, but it's really hard for me to let go. And I almost feel like she's struggling with the fact that, she's aging, and what she could do 10 years ago, maybe she can't do today. It's just, I've just tried to be really supportive and listen to her, but it's something I didn't anticipate coming into it, that could be part of the disorganization behind her clothing.
Oh, definitely. That's a real, again, a bigger topic too, but I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think part of that goes a little bit along with Sharon's question or observation about, when you have a change in identity, or a change in, oh, I used to do this thing, or I used to, even very common with clothes is, I used to be this size. I used to wear these things and they made me feel good. And our bodies change, and things change with time. And so it can be really hard to let go of those things, because it's like, but I loved that time. I loved when I could wear that mini skirt. And just walking people through the process of saying, but what do you want? What makes you feel good now? Because by holding on to things that kind of are so reminiscent of our past, and again, not necessarily with a person's belongings who's passed away, but some of our own belongings, holding on to those things can keep us locked in one place, and they're not allowing us to move forward and see what else is out there. And so that's just one way of approaching it. And again, that takes time and it takes trust, especially in the client organizer relationship. But slowly, saying to her, well, what would make you feel good now? What makes you feel, what things you like to do now? And what does your wardrobe represent now? And maybe that can help move that forward.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that question. Next up, we have Sandra.
Thank you. Angie's my niece. And
I almost called you Sandra. And I was like, wait, that's Aunt Sandy.
Sandra and Sandy. My computer calls me Sandra. But Angie, I really learned a whole lot from this. And of course, went through the death of my mother, and we 5 children, I had to kind of divvy up things. And George and I kind of made a process and had this great big flow chart, and we gave people their first choices and tried to go from there. But I really see the things that really I need to do to just kind of prepare for this time, because I think there's things that you can do before a person passes that you need to kind of declutter.
Yeah. Well, and Sandy, with that, again, it kind of depends on the type of grief. And sometimes loss, they call it anticipatory grief. But when someone is going to pass away and it's a longer disease process, even though it's hard in the moment, it can give you the opportunity to talk about those things and to be able to say, I'd really like this. And maybe being able to have a moment with your loved one before they pass, and being able to share a story over that object. And again, you don't always get that. And I know some of you on this call, your parents have died suddenly, and so you didn't get that. But being able to, like you said, kind of prepare for that and be able to share with your loved ones before you pass can be a gift.
Yeah. Well, thank you for today.
Oh, I'm glad you came. Thank you.
Angie, we have a question in the chat from Leilani. Leilani is curious about navigating, going through items when you have multiple family members wanting to be involved, kids, spouses, grandkids. A lot of people want to be present. Do you have any advice for how to approach that situation?
Yeah, Leilani, that can be a tricky one. And so as a professional organizer, I've actually found that quite a few times where I've worked with families, and the families will all be there and kind of saying what they want. And that can be a lot. And so I might recommend, I don't have a specific answer to this. It kind of is dependent on situations, but something I might recommend is if people can write out things before you get together. So create kind of a list, or items that really mean something to you. Kind of Sandy was saying in their family, I know they created kind of a spreadsheet or a list of items and kind of, divvied things out. It can feel impersonal, but it also helps to do those things ahead of time before everyone gets together and all the emotions are a part of it. So I think if you can do as much ahead of time and really so people know what expectations are a little bit, that can help. But again, it can be really hard when everyone is there. And I think maybe all getting on the same page. What is our goal here? Do we need, especially if you need to get a house sold or get items out quickly, that can really add to the pressure of having to make quick decisions. So in that, I might even suggest, again, if you have to get a storage unit, that is okay. Just trying to take shame and judgment away from that. Like, hey, we're having a hard time making a decision as a family. Should we just get a storage unit so we can all process and then take some time to make these decisions? I hope that helped a little bit, Leilani. I think it can, again, be dependent on situations.
Thank you for that, Angie. We have another question in the chat, and Leilani wrote, thank you.
Oh,
We
yeah.
have a question from Joyce in the chat who writes, my parents passed away overseas. I took many photos of items dear to me since I could not bring them to my house. I also gave items to friends knowing that they may not want them necessarily. However, I knew I gave the items to dear friends and that I did not throw them away. The photos validated the fact that these items really existed.
Oh, I love that. I think that is a great way, especially if you couldn't be there to, process and handle the physical objects yourself. Having photos and giving them to friends, I think that is a great way of honoring your loved one. And part of that is just putting it out there and then letting it go. Again, sometimes our friends may, like you said, may or may not want them, but the intention is there, and that is a piece of your loved one that you're sharing with your friends.
Kayla has a question for you.
Hi, Kayla.
Angie, yeah, that was really great. But I just really liked kind of your note about, having friends over, helping you do the dishes, go through mail. Kind of reminded me of a term we use with organizing, body doubling.
Oh.
Yeah, I just thought it was really great, a way to support someone, even just kind of coming over to be, comforting presence, even if you don't really know what to say, you can just kind of sit there and be supportive. So that was a great point.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate bringing up that term because for the organizers on the call, I think that's really good to remember too when we're in clients' homes. Sometimes we have this desire to say, oh, we want to move, we want to get through these things, but just holding space for people and sitting next to them as they go through their mail, if they are okay with it, then that is what they need. And I think reminding yourself, I'm here to support this client and this is what they need. And even as a friend, sometimes I've gone to friends' houses and I'm almost like, oh, do you need more? And it's like, no, just sit with people. And if they say, I'd love you to sit with me as I do my laundry, okay, I can do that. And we can sit and share stories. And that can also be part of the healing. Sorry, the sun is like blinding me, which is a good problem, but I'm like trying to figure out, there we go.
We have a comment from Karen in the chat. When it comes to clothing, I have found that when I want to keep something that holds memory, even if I don't wear it currently, I need to store it somewhere else, not mixed in with my everyday clothes. Separating the memorabilia, in quotes, and the functional wardrobe can be really helpful.
Yeah, Karin, that is a great point. And again, I do that even in my own life a lot, but also as I work with clients, because I think what happens is when it kind of all gets mixed in, it almost loses its meaning and not sentimentality, but you see it often. And so removing it and maybe creating a special box for it or creating a special place in your home for it. So when you do look at it, it's something that brings you joy and you're not having to move through all these things to get dressed in the morning. So again, simplifying your immediate environment is really helpful. So making less decisions and having to go through less items. So again, if you can create a memory space or a memory box, that can be really helpful. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
We have a lot of appreciation for you in the chat.
Oh.
We have time for one more question from Angela. It's good to see you again, Angela.
Yeah, hi Whitney and hi
Angela.
some other people that are on the call. I wanted to touch on something that I didn't think I heard anyone mention yet, and that was pet loss. I recently lost my dog about a month ago. after a very long and, silly and joyful life. I'm the kind of person, as some of you know, that I like to get rid of things like fairly quickly to just kind of make space in my space. But I think if it's a tip that could be helpful for anyone, is I didn't get rid of everything, and I kind of decided, what did obviously sentimental things, but I kind of felt like, what would another dog or dogs, who are in foster care, the shelter, really be like using right now, and they can benefit from it? And what are things that when I eventually have the heart to get another dog in the future, I'll want like right away, like a crate, a bed, some food bowls, kind of like the things you need to bring the baby home from the hospital, right? Like hitting the ground running, and that they're not like cloth, it's rubber, it's crates, it's things that you can put in the attic, and they're not going to like be a home for spiders or I don't know, whatever, stuff like that. But I feel like that's brought me peace, knowing that there's a supply of things that I won't be starting totally from square one, but that other dogs are benefiting from his, estate right now, and the same way that he needed help because he was from the shelter. So I think I didn't really expect it to happen. It was kind of a sudden loss, but I just wanted to share that for whatever it's worth, that was kind of an interesting insight that I got from that process that ended up feeling actually pretty good in a way to be able to help kind of move on. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that, Angela. And I'm glad you mentioned that with pet loss, because I think sometimes that can get overlooked as loss, and it really is a very big loss. I know we have some friends, some people on the call that their pets mean everything to them. And so I think it is really important to acknowledge that as well. And also, Angela, I like that you talked about even donating to places that can help you know, like, oh, there are other pets and other families that can get use out of these items as well.
yeah.
So thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of appreciation and gratitude in the chat. We'll save it for you, Angie, so you can read it later. One resource that I wanted to share really quickly before we all sign off that Jane mentioned is a podcast about grief by Anderson Cooper, and it's called All There Is. I did listen to the first season, and it's really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is definitely worth a listen. It's a really good. Thank you. You recommended that to me, Whitney. So thank you.
Yeah, and we'll share your resources and the resources that are shared here today. We'll send a follow-up email and a link to the replay for folks.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for sharing your stories and asking questions. It really means a lot to see everyone here. And this was the first time I've presented, and I was nervous, and this felt really good. So thank you for creating a safe place to have this dialogue.
Well, thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing your experience with us and your knowledge and your wisdom and your insights. We're very grateful.
Thank you. Well, good to be here.
Real quick before we sign off, next month we'll be having Ask the Organizer on Wednesday, March 6th, same time, 4 to 5 p.m. And our special guest is going to be Darcy from NARI. It's the National Association for the Remodeling Industry. So we're going to talk about remodeling. How do you find a contractor? How do you hire a reputable one? What are some things you should be aware of? How do you get prepared for a renovation? So bring all your questions about renovations next month, and we hope to see you back here. Thank you so much for being here today. And again, Angie, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Good to see everyone.